Tiny at the age of 8, Liam's life abruptly changed when a powerful hurricane destroyed his city, stealing. When the surviving children were placed in an orphanage, Liam stopped talking because the trauma had shut him down completely. He wouldn't even make eye contact with anyone while the other kids played. Instead, he would sit by the window and stare outside, lost in his past. At night, he would wake up from nightmares. That night, the last thing he heard was his mother's voice amid the howling winds, screams, collapsing walls, streets filling with water and silence. His mother's name was spoken into the darkness, but nobody at the orphanage was able to ease his inner suffering. One day, a worker at the orphanage sat beside him and chatted quietly. "Liam, you are aware that there are kind people in the world who wish to assist you," but Liam rejected them, and to him the world was nothing but loneliness and devastation. When Liam's condition didn't improve, the orphanage director made a decision to find a remedy. One of the kids talked about how she assisted those in need while watching Ellen's DeGeneres show. The director and a few volunteers were moved by this and decided to write a letter for Liam that said, "Dear Ellen, little Liam lost his family in a disaster, and he hasn't spoken since that day. He was once a joyful child, but is now trapped in silence. Maybe you can give him hope." When the letter reached Ellen's team, the room fell silent. It was difficult to think of such a young child bearing such grief and sorrow. Ellen took a deep breath, read the letter, and turned to her team. "We need to do a miracle for this child, but how Liam wouldn't talk, wouldn't trust people, and how could they possibly reach his heart?" When Liam was taken to the studio with the staff from the orphanage, his fear only got worse. His eyes darted around the room, scanning everyone, but he avoided making eye contact. The bright studio lights, the rush of crew members, the large screams, and the overlapping voices were all too much. He was quietly put into a chair, folded his hands in his lap, and lowered his head. His small arms were wrapped tightly around his knees, as if he was trying to protect himself. His eyes were fixed on a flickering light bulb in the corner of the room, as if he was trying to hold on to something. But what? The door opened, and the background hum of the studio briefly faded. For a little period, Ellen DeGeneres entered the room and just watched Liam. He was a tiny, frail youngster stuck in his own world, and he appeared so helpless that the wrong word could break him to pieces. Ellen smiled softly as she lowered herself to his eye level and kneed down in front of him. Her soothing, gentle voice, "Hello, Liam, I'm Ellen." Liam raised his head a little, trying his best not to look at her, but for a few seconds his eyes met hers, and in those few moments everything was lost, fearful, hopeless, and despairing, but Liam remained silent. Ellen was patient, not hurrying him, not trying to fill the void, knowing that she couldn't expect him to speak like an adult or to trust her right away. She reached into her bag and took out a small teddy bear. Its fur was a little worn, but it looked warm and racing. Ellen held out to Liam, saying, "I brought this for you." Liam gazed at the teddy bear, but declined to accept it. Ellen gave a gentle head rub, while maintaining a quiet smile. "One of my favorite toys is this one." Liam's hand shook. Liam finally raised his head to look at her this time, and for a brief moment, he noticed something familiar in her eyes. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached out with his little hands and took the teddy bear, holding it close to his chest as if it were something fragile, something precious. For the first time, he felt warmth, but he remained silent. Ellen's voice had fallen to a whisper, almost like a secret meant only for him. "You know, I used to feel lonely when I was little too." He took a deep breath, and for a brief moment he opened his mouth as if to speak, but then he stopped, and the words vanished before they could form. Ellen paused for a moment, then gently asked, "Would you like to tell me something?" Liam's eyes shifted away. He had so much he wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. His throat felt tight, like he was choking on everything he'd been holding inside. Ellen waited. She gave him time. Sometimes silence is the loudest voice of all. And then after a long pause, she leaned in and gently put a hand on Liam's shoulder. When he looked up, his eyes were watery, but he didn't cry for the first time. Perhaps someone was willing to wait for him, and then something very small but incredibly powerful happened. Liam nodded. Ellen smiled. And sometimes a miracle starts with just the smallest movement of the head. That day, Ellen hadn't gotten Liam to speak, but she had ignited an SP spark inside him. Additionally, They decided to honor Liam's family's memory by helping to rebuild a community devastated by the hurricane. And after returning from the program, something started to change every night. The boy, who used to wake up screaming from nightmares, now saw something different in his dreams. When Ellen handed him the teddy bear, he muttered, "Mom," in a whisper so quiet that it was almost inaudible that the orphanage workers couldn't contain their emotions, which was a clue. At first, Liam only whispered at night while holding his teddy bear close to him. His voice was like a passing whisper. Melody left the orphanage too soon to hold on to, but as the days went by, the other kids noticed how much he loved his teddy bear and began asking him small, interested questions. At first, Liam was hand, but instead of backing down, he started nodding in response, and one day a kid asked him a straightforward question. Liam hesitated, his lips scarcely moving, but then he said in the quietest voice that, although it was hardly perceptible, it was a breakthrough for Liam. A few weeks later, Liam received a special note from Ellen DeGeneres that said, "Whenever you feel ready to talk, I'll be here." This time, Liam took a piece of paper, grasped a pen in his tiny hands, and scribbled his first word, "Thank you." It was only 2 words, but to Liam, it was the beginning of something new. With the help of the therapy Ellen set up, Liam's life started to change completely. Eventually, he started speaking again, and the audience stood up and applauded when he walked onto the stage by himself. At the center of the stage, Ellen stood with her arms open, and Liam whispered, "Thank you, Ellen." The entire studio erupted in applause. That day, as Ellen hugged him, she leaned in and whispered, "You are so strong, Liam, and knowing you've been honor, and maybe that was a real miracle."